muscular population of the industry. It's only in the government that they're so entrenched. And as you have seen, some of the Democrats have started to grumble about it too, and state of California, state of New York, the real blue states are coming up and trying to trim the unions. I absolutely believe in the fairness, and the fairness is you cannot help elect a government and then negotiate with that government for your survival. And Davis-Bacon Wage Act says that you cannot deduct any time you have given a loan to an employee from the paycheck. The employee has to pay you back. Same way, I really think it's a right thing to say that the union should not be mandatory, but voluntary, so that if you want to join in, just like we are members of the roofing associations or AGC, Associated General Contractors, everybody has a right to become a member, but it should be voluntary and not through the help of the government.
Meanwhile, there's controversy overseas. We've been talking about this for the last several weeks, is all of the turmoil you're seeing in the Middle East. And now finally you're starting to see a bit more collective action, if you will, from the United Nations, from European countries, and finally from President Obama himself to take a stronger stance on Libya. Interesting, though, you talk about the Middle East, and India is not that far away from the Middle East. And in some ways, we share some characteristics with the Middle East. For one, we have a very young population. Only difference is India's economy has been doing very well, so there hasn't been much angst on an economic front that the way there is in the Middle East. But the article I read had an interesting title. It's called "Where is India's Tahrir Square?" In other words, why aren't there protests happening in India the way that you see in the Middle East? And it talks about two different things happening at once. For one, the economic conditions in India are better, so you don't see quite the rancor within the people. On the other hand, lately, if you've been watching the news in India, you've been realizing a couple of things. One, inflation in India is very high. The cost of food, we talked about a story last week about the cost of food inflation in India is becoming very difficult to feed the lowest rung of the economy. So in other words, there is rancor building for things like inflation and also for things like corruption. That was the premise of this article, and it was a good read. I highly recommend it on opendemocracy.net. Here it talks about the fact that corruption in India has reached a point where the people are starting to have that sentiment of protesting against the government to get to a better social good. And I don't know whether we're going to see protests in India happen, but I think we are sort of at the simmering point in some ways. And if
the corruption is absolutely something that has defied India from solving it. I don't know why India has not been able to solve it. Case in point, there was an article in Washington Post this past week. India is now getting in the world of welfare. They see Brazil. What Brazil has done is start giving cash directly to the poor people. So far it has been that you have a ration card and you go to the people that have the grains and the vegetables and the others. You go and buy them through that ration card because you're given a certain amount of money. Well, it appears like only 27 cents of a dollar actually reach the people we're supposed to go. They're counting population with the help of this I-metrics or whatever they call them. And what they're doing is they're going to use that and actually give aid directly to the poor people, directly to the poor pregnant women, directly to the little girls that don't have the nutritious value, directly. That's the one thing. And of course, as usual, there are a lot of critics, And the critics are saying, instead of fixing the corrupt system, the government is defeatist to resort to sending cash. And cash in the hands of a family need not necessarily mean food in the belly of the children and women.
That's what I was thinking, that, handing cash seems like the obvious thing to do, and yet the reality is those poor families may never use it for the purpose or the reason you intend. How do you make sure it was well spent money?
No, you don't think poor people are stupid. Here's another quote that I thought was totally bad. If we put cash in uneducated poor people's hands, how do we monitor whether they spent it on a nutritious meal and not on the potato chips, soda, alcohol, or shampoo? I mean, that exactly was a conversation here when we were trying to fix the welfare, So to my way of thinking, yeah, let them try direct aid. It is a good thing. But they still need to take care of corruption. It has to be faced somehow.
It has to be faced. And I think this is the point of the article. Here's some numbers which, tells the story. Direct investment in India fell more than 31% to 24 billion in 2010, even as investors flocked to developing nations. In other words, they were investing their money in overseas nations, but they were not investing in India. And the decline highlights the challenges outsiders still face in India, particularly because of the corruption. India's economy is still growing at 9%. But guess what? The inflation rate is also nearly at 9%. What it tells you is that India has been lucky to have the kind of growth that it has had because we are not spending the money wisely in India. The government officials could do a lot more to see those dollars go further than they have been. It's something else. Some companies, including MetLife and the retail giant Walmart, for example, have been eager to invest and expand in India, but haven't been able to because of policymakers. In other words, the red tape and the amount of time it takes to get through the government and all of the paperwork. A lot of the foreign investors, they just give up because they don't want to deal with it all.
You understand that there is 1.2 billion population, and they need to have jobs, even small jobs. You get Walmart in there, it wipes out a few million jobs if they're going to get into the grocery business, because you have, rickshawalas and the others, the street vendors. I mean, they have a life. They live off of it, with Walmart coming in. So I can understand some of the policy problems that they have. But let me give you a reason for discontent among a lot of countries because of food prices. Right. Food prices are going high. For instance, in America, average household needs 7% of their paycheck to buy groceries. And compare that, for instance, with India, where the 35% of the wage goes to groceries. Brazil is 25%. Tunisia, which is in the news right now, is 36%.
Egypt was 38%.
That's right. And Iran is 26%. I mean, Pakistan is 46%, so on and so forth. So all these prices, they take a bite out of your wages. And that's why they get angry when inflation comes in there, is, oh my God,
Right. Just think about how we feel when the price of gas goes up, right? Because it hits your pocketbook hard. Every time you see that dime jump per gallon, it's going to cost you an extra $10, $15, $20 for that next fill up. In this case, if you remember the stories coming out of Egypt early on, right before the protests started, it was the fact that the government raised the price of grain.
That's right.
Right? And it was a modest change, but it was enough for the people to feel like the straw had been broken on their backs.
That's right.
And they started protesting. And look at the change that we've experienced. So this substantial chunk, and India is not far behind at 35%. It's